Pati tema iš tikrųjų nėra kokia tai ten labai nauja ir nepažinta, tačiau klausimas iš tikrųjų, kiek mes atliekame skaičiavimų ir vertinimų tam, kad suprastumėme, kokia visgi yra ta sporto sukuriama socioekonominė nauda. Tai tikėtina dalis žmonių, kurie šiandien yra prisijungę, dalyvavote vasario mėnesį surengtame sporto forume, kuris vyko Litexpo, ir mes turėjome svečią, Nyderlandų atstovą su tikrai įspūdingu pranešimu, kurio metu buvo demonstruoti skaičiai ir pagrįsta būtinybė skaičiavimus ir vertinimus atlikti. Tai iš tikrųjų, lėšų dydis, jis visada yra ribotas, ištekliai yra visada riboti, tai tikrai sprendžiame svarbius klausimus, kaip šie ištekliai galėtų ir turėtų būti panaudoti, o sporte sukuriama vertė, tą, ką rodo tyrimų rezultatai, jie tikrai pranoksta vertę, kur yra sukuriama kituose laisvalaikio, sektoriuose, kaip pavyzdžiui turizmas. Bet apie tai tikrai kalbės lektorius, ekspertas Themistocles Kokolakakis iš Šefildo universiteto, iš sporto ir fizinio aktyvumo tyrimų centro. Jis yra iš tikrųjų antrasis žmogus šitame svarbiame centre, kuriame atliekami tyrimai, sektoriaus tyrimai tiek nacionaliniu lygiu, tiek tarptautiniu, europiniu ir pasauliniu lygiu. Ir paskutinį, ką noriu paminėti, kad Themis tai buvo vienas iš lydinčių ekspertų projekte, kurį inicijavo Europos komisija, ir tai buvo 3 metų projektas, 22-25 metų projektas, jis yra jau dabar pasibaigęs, dėl harmonizuotos sporto statistikos sporto sektoriuje. Tai kol kas mes išvadų šito projekto neturime, laukiame galutinių patvirtinimų iš Europos komisijos, ir tai yra 3 dalių projektas, 3 dalių surinkti duomenys ir pateikta informacija. Tai tikrai Nacionalinė sporto agentūra pasidalins šią informaciją tuomet, kada mes ją turėsime viešai prieinamą. Tai skaidrių yra nemažai, tam tikrą informaciją aš kalbėjau su ekspertu, mes ją, kaip pasakyti, tiesiog galbūt jinai bus praleista, bet tikrai linkiu aktyvaus dalyvavimo, klausimų ir tikrai mes į šitas temas ir toliau gilinsimės ir suteiksime reikiamą žinojimą. Tai ačiū labai Edvinui Eimontui, Vilniaus miestas, investicijos daromos ir planuojamos, tai tiesiog pavyko ištrūkti iš kasdieninių darbų ir atvykti pas mus šiandien bent kuriam laikui pabūti drauge ir galbūt kai ko paklausti, pasiteirauti ir panašiai. Okay, so thank you very much, Themis. You are coming second time to National Sport Agency, but probably the 4th time already in Lithuania, because we had a good cooperation with the National Statistics Office some years ago. And this is a big pleasure once again, to come back to the economic importance of sport, and at the same time, to broaden the issue towards the value issues of sport and what is very important, social return of investments, what we are proceeding in sport in different countries and different contexts. So thank you. I am not taking more time from you, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vilma, for the invitation. I'll start with some studies that have happened already about SROI in Netherlands and in the UK. And then I will consider some more concepts around this and the results of the recent pan-European account, which is the economics of sport in the EU and in Lithuania. So this probably you have seen it already from Netherlands. So when we say about SROI, you get a number such as 2.76 here in the middle. And this is the relationship between the savings that we envisage that sport makes to the society and the cost of having this intervention, the cost of sport. So the cost of sport is the cost of a government in this study, public cost, contributions from central government and municipalities. Then you have to add the private cost, which is sponsorship, spending on membership fees, sports equipment, etc., and the cost of voluntary work. In the Netherlands, this is quite considerable because they actually pay a little bit their volunteers. So this is the cost of having sport, organized sport, and then the savings were identified in terms of health, life loss, quality of life, healthcare cost, injuries, labor savings such as absenteeism and productivity, social costs such as criminality and learning, and voluntary work, which is in this case, it was considered both as a cost and as a saving. But the savings were quite considerable, and the ratio between savings and cost is 2.76. So in a way, in this study, if you invest €1 on sport, you get back 2.76. A higher ratio was established in England. In this case, also we have public sport, private sport as participants and volunteers, but the outcomes were more wide. So we have in this case physical and mental health, and that was reduced CHDs, stroke, type 2 diabetes, breast cancer, colon cancer, dementia, depression, so everything around physical and mental health. And then we have mental well-being, which was something different, improved subjective well-being of participants and volunteers, individual development, which was improvements in education attainment and enhanced human capital, and finally, social and community development, which is improved social capital, crime reduction, non-market value for organizations utilizing sport volunteers. And we found that the inputs were £21.85 billion, but the outcomes, again, were quite considerable at 71.6 billion. So again, that study also highlighted that there is a very big benefit from investing in sport. If you invest £1 in sport, you get back 3.28, which is the ratio between the outcomes and the inputs. And that enabled, so that was established in 2 countries, around 2.5, a ratio between 2.5 and 3.5. And that meant that if we take all these categories and we assume that 500,000 people, say in the UK, become regularly active according to the WHO guidelines, then the savings through all these categories will be 1.06 billion pounds. So this is a very big and tangible result about what the effects are from increased sports participation. I want to emphasize that there are some differences between those 2 methodologies, and the European Union has more or less taken up with a harmonization of sports statistics to proceed with the more inclusive definition that was used in the UK, which includes the subjective well-being and the social capital. The reason for that is that these two are the most important in terms of monetization concepts. So I want just to highlight this because these are the two non-tangible concepts which do not actually have a monetary outcome necessarily, but they are very prominent in the current research across Europe. And if you are familiar with the health evaluations for investing in hospitals, this is exactly the same procedure. So this is a methodology adopted by the EU, but has a rich history in health. And that is that you don't just take the tangible financial impact of the investment, but you also take the quality of life that this investment generates. And in the case of health, this is with QUALIS. So you say that you want to invest in a procedure, in an intervention, like a dance or sport intervention for adults that may be falling from the stairs and they have injuries. And you apply this QUALIS, which is not tangible, on the evaluation of the investment. The same thing is happening here now with the sport investment. And the two basic concepts is the subjective well-being and social capital. The first is something like happiness and contentment of the participants. We have evidence that sport generates this excess of happiness and contentment. And the second is social capital. By social capital, we mean the social integration of individuals within the community through friendships, associations, organizations, and family. And obviously, if one is in a sports club or in a health club, then that increases the interactions with other people and increases the social capital. Both of them are very important categories in terms of inequality, policy for reducing inequalities, because these are two concepts, subjective well-being and social capital, that have been always linked to income. So people with higher income are expected to have subjective well-being and social capital at a higher level. And although we cannot affect through these policies directly income, we can affect these indicators through sports participation. Higher sports participation means that we can achieve outcomes of social value that are generated usually with higher incomes. So that's quite important. And in this slide, I have some definitions of social capital from the past, which are important if you want to go through with them. Then a more detailed plan of how social value is created. So the starting points is the sport participation and sport volunteering. So from sports participation, from each one of them, we go to generation of social capital, generation of subjective well-being, better outcomes in education, health benefits, which is quite obvious in terms, and I will speak more in detail of health benefits in terms of starting from sports participation, but also from sports volunteering. And then we have, as a final effect, better results in terms of criminal justice. So we have, it has been demonstrated that people who participate in sport or volunteer in sport have smaller criminal problems than otherwise. A key article where a systematic review has occurred and that informed the EU harmonization procedure for the SROI analysis is this article, Striving for Global Consensus, a systematic review of social return of investment applied to physical activity and sport. And you can see all these categories that were outlined before. So we have general categories: health, crime, education, subjective well-being, and social capital. In these general categories, the EU has identified that the most important one in terms of the financial, in terms of the impact that it is generated, is social capital, subjective well-being, and health. Those three have to be made for SROI. Crime and education are important, but they do not contribute so much in terms of the final ratio of the final monetization. So if there is a problem to do the crime and education, a country may proceed without that and still will have a very important study. So on the right-hand side, you see the subcategories for each category, which I will leave this for you to read later on if you want. Then if I consider those three categories, I would like also to add that obviously on top of all this, you have the economic category, which is meant. So these are the categories outside the straight economic evaluation, which is in its active part, it is part of the SROI analysis. So we have, according to Eurostat, the subjective well-being, which is about happiness and comprises three distinct sub-dimensions, which is the life satisfaction, the history of the person in terms of the emotions and joy that has. For example, you may ask a question, if you felt happy yesterday, if you felt joy yesterday, there is a historical dimension to this rather than in general. And the third one is the eudaimonics, which involves a sense of meaning of life. So there may be questions in the questionnaires about whether or not you feel that your life is meaningful, and you take all this into account to get an index of subjective well-being. But sometimes it is a very simple question, such as, do you feel happy? So you rate this from 1 to 10, and you try to coordinate this with income and participation. And why it is important to us, if I consider the case of sports volunteers from 8 countries in the past research, consistently we see that I have sports volunteers here, but it could have been sport participants, the same answers more or less. We have that in sports volunteers, the average happiness index is higher than in non-sports volunteers. So that is from a previous survey and research evaluation. Similarly, if we consider the social capital, the interaction with other people in a community, the sports volunteers have considerable, about 22% greater social capital than non-sport volunteers. The same, to a lesser extent, however, is true about sport participants. And then, having established that, then we can go further and see the case of inequalities. In this table, you have the same study, the sample between females and males. The sample had 43% females. However, when we go to the volunteers, the percentage of females drops. So 33% of the volunteers were females compared to 67% of males. So that shows that these benefits of subjective well-being and social capital that can be generated are one-sided a little bit, are more obtained by males than females. And that is a question to be addressed. Having said that, one has to consider that maybe females do the same for arts. So arts are likely to have similar effects. So if they volunteer more in arts, then that would compensate this inequality in sports. However, we do not have this data in detail for this table. Similarly, in terms of working, we can see that people that work full-time and therefore have more income are also more likely to volunteer and therefore more likely to obtain the benefits of social capital and subjective well-being compared to people that work that are unemployed or even retired. So that was a surprise because people that are retired, we thought that they will have more tendency to sport, to volunteer in sport, yet that's not the case. So people that approach an active lifestyle are likely to do more things as well. So really squeezing their free time, while people with a lot of free time, usually they don't fill it up. This is a challenge for policy because of the benefits that people that are retired are going to get through sports participation or volunteering. Then we have, this is the formula that we are using in order, the basic formula to monetize, to put an economic value on sport, on subjective well-being and social capital, but I'm not going to explain this. The main problem that we have is to estimate the coefficients Vita 1 and Vita 2, and there are many econometric methods to do so, and we decided not to say that this is the best way to do this. The only thing I want to say is that there is a quick way. If all econometrics and statistics fails, we can just use the qualis like we do in the health sector, where you have somebody with good health, that means 15,000 euros, something like that. It's possible to do that with sport, but we are more ambitious, and there are many methodologies for each country to evaluate in detail an individual bespoke figure. Having said that about subjective well-being and social capital, I want to go a little bit on health benefits, because this is very important. The importance is that the health budgets in all the EU countries are a bit squeezed. So if we can demonstrate that sport will make a big difference in these budgets, that is extremely good for the sports clubs. Sports clubs have also to defend their funding, and this is a this, in my opinion, is the most tangible way to show that the sport club can lead to savings. If you just say that you have quality of life, okay, has a long-term impact, but doesn't show on the budget. This one shows on the budget. So we have that if you have sport active people, the strokes reduce in a ratio of 25 to 35%. These are, by the way, data from both USA and Europe, and they are from a case study of Ireland. So you can find them in the economic importance of sport in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, from 2 or 3 years ago, I think. In terms of breast cancer, the risk reduction is 20%, colon cancer, risk reduction 19% to 30%, type 2 diabetes, risk reduction 35 to 40%, hip fracture among older adults, you have a reduction of 66 to 68%, which is the biggest effect. And this, for example, in the country where I work, in the UK, this is the biggest strain of expense for the national health system, is that people have hip fractures from falling or from the stairs, for example. A lot of the houses are on 2 or 3 levels. People go up and down, there are no lifts, and that's how they have the accidents. And that reduces by 66%. Back pain reduces by 25%, hypertension 33% reduction. And then we go to mental health, mainly dementia, 30%, and depression, 30% and 48%. These are the risk reductions associated with sport. And that means that we can estimate, there is a way to estimate how we can save money through sport, and we start with a prevalence rate. For example, in the case of type 2 diabetes, we know that that was in the case of Ireland, but it is, I suppose, must be the same statistics more or less everywhere. The type 2 diabetes in Europe, the type 2 diabetes for people between 20 and 79 has a prevalence rate of 3.98%, which means that about 4% of the population of these age groups have type 2 diabetes. And then if we take this, the risk associated, the risk reduction for sport, then we take the prevalence rate for the society, we combine it with the risk reduction through sport of 40% and the activity rate that exists in this case in Ireland of 33.73%. We combine these three facts and then we split the prevalence rate between inactive adults, which have a higher prevalence rate, 4.6, and sport participants, which have a small prevalence rate of 2.76. So this difference will dictate the health savings. And like that, we proceed and we can have estimates such as this, which is, for example, per sport participant, we can, in this case, we have a savings for, in terms of dementia of 179.6, depression 5.9, that's euros. So for every sports participant, we have this kind of savings. But if we go, so all this, and that includes subjective well-being. You can see 1,612. This is the value monetized for feeling happy, for having a quality of life, and also includes a very big value for social capital, 734. So overall, when you put the health savings together with the quality of life, you get a saving of about one salary per year. So a sports participant or a sports volunteer, it's like, in terms of quality of life and health savings, it is as if has an extra salary, a monthly salary per year. Then I have some policy recommendations, which I will leave them there, but we can revisit them later on. These have to do with the establishing these indicators for health, the health savings associated with sport, and the causality between sports participation and education, because we never know if it is education that causes more sports participation or sports participation that causes better education achievements. Most likely it's both of them. But anyway, I'll pass it by quickly this, because I want to make this final comment about the value in the community. And this is something that has been pursued in some countries and lately in Japan as well, where the Development Bank of Japan want to make a big investment of fitness clubs, and they would like support from the public purse. And one way to demonstrate the value of the investment is not just to say that in terms of is not just to say that the return of investment is in terms of employment and gross value added, but also to put the social value, which is everything that it is weighted in the SROI balance. So we have to estimate what is the result from the investment in terms of sports participants, extra sports participants, and extra sports volunteers. And if we can demonstrate that there is a social value to each person that participates or to each person that volunteers, then we simply multiply this value with the number. For example, if a local investment generates an extra 100 sport volunteers, or then in terms of generated well-being, there will be an increase of 100 times, in this case, 2,248 euros in the community, assuming that the latter figure is the actual value that you get through the SROI calculation, as it is in terms of the previous tables. So the same logic you can do with the social capital and find a figure which shows the economic and social value of the investment for the community, and then you can demonstrate the need for this investment, not just in terms of the backbone of the economics, but also of the quality of life that it is generated, exactly as it happens in health. And then I have some presentation of the economics. This is because it is the very last pan-European account. That's not about the social value, but economic value. This is the input-output table, which the form that we use. And we have a new definition of, a new Vilnius definition for sport, which has considered all the categories. For example, we have a list of about 150 categories at the 4-digit CPA level, and from them we have a sport content, which we'll try to evaluate and see how much exists, how much of this sports content there is in each country. And we have made some new changes in the Vilnius definition in terms of the methodology. We have stopped using the previous core definition, narrow definition, and broad definition, and we have come to the classifications that exist in the tourist satellite account and in the environmental satellite account in terms of characteristic goods and connected goods. So the characteristic goods, I'll speak about this in the next slide. We have also made a differentiation between active sport and passive sport for consumption, and the reason is that the SROI analysis requires only the active parts of sport, not the passive. So we don't put in the SROI spending on sports gambling, for example, or spending on going to the stadium and attending a sport match, but only the participation part, because this is the one that generates health benefits and happiness and mainly social capital. We have also included the whole consumption of sports tourists into the methodology. This is what I have just said about getting or changing the definition from to characteristic and sports goods. The characteristic goods in the case of sport are mainly associated with practicing sport, and we include sport services, sport education, and some parts of police and defense services if they employed athletes as a way of subsidizing them for training in sport. So mainly sport services and sports education. This sport education also includes sport education of children at primary, secondary schools and universities. So all this is included in the characteristic part of the sport market. Items such as trainers, sports clothing, although they relate to sport, you need them to do sport, they are not characteristic goods. They are considered connected goods together with everything else. So this is an example from health, as it is in the handbook of the Eurostat for satellite accounts. And then we have the experience so far, just a reminder of what satellite accounts we have so far. And there are a lot of countries that have progressed with satellite accounts, including Austria, Belgium, Croatia, Cyprus, Estonia, Germany, Hungary, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Portugal, Poland, Spain, Greece is at the beginning. And we have outside the EU now satellite accounts in the UK, Switzerland, and Japan. We have also extensions of sports satellite accounts for particular sports, such as golf, gully games in Ireland, and we have also regionalization of accounts. So we have models which can produce the economic impact of sport in regions and sometimes in cities. These are some of the results from the last European pan-European account. So we have the top 5 countries that have these are consistent with the year 2019, and because of that we have the United Kingdom in the accounts. The top 5 countries in generating gross value added from sport are Germany, United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Spain. But this reflects the size of the economies. So it's not so much so informative as it is expected. What is more informative is the share of countries in terms of sport GVA divided by total GVA. That will give you the share. And in this case, as always, we have Austria on the first spot because of the Alps and skiing. And then we have Croatia, Belgium, United Kingdom, mainly because of golf, and then Poland. There is, as you can see, a big gap between Austria and the second place. Then we have the same employment results, the impact from employment. Overall, we have in the EU 6 million about people directly employed in sport. The biggest employer is in UK, but again, this reflects sizes of the economy. More informative is when we see the percentage shares, sport employment divided by total employment. And now we can see that Sweden, which has a very high sports participation, the participation rate influences this ratio a lot and leads the table. Lithuania is 4th in this table. So we have Sweden, UK, Finland, I think, and Lithuania. Then overall, these are the results from the pan-European account. We have we divide the table in terms of characteristic and connected goods for GDP and for employment. So, and we also have the direct impact, which is what the satellite account tells you. And we have the indirect impact, which is a further evaluation of how this sport goods or sport employment relates to the overall economy. Because if you would do a construction, for example, in a sports club, a construction project, you need further raw materials. If you manufacture sport t-shirts, you need further raw materials. So all this interacts with the network of the economy and produces more jobs and more gross domestic product, which is not sport, but it is generated because of sport. So that's the indirect part. So when we see all of it, the direct and indirect, we get a total GDP of 627 billion across the EU and a total employment of 9 million people across the EU. And the shares then are for direct sport GDP 2%, but then if we go to the total is 3.4%. Similarly, in employment, a share of 2.48 becomes 3.8 if you include the indirect effect. And we have the associated multipliers from the economic analysis. And we can see that in each case, across characteristic connected goods and the total valuation, the percentage of employment is greater than the percentage of GDP, which means that sport is a very efficient generator of employment. If for an average sector, you expect that if you generate a 3.4% gross domestic product, then the employment should also be 3.4%. But if you are more employment intensive, that is higher. So in this case, it's consistently higher everywhere. That means that if one wants to have a policy of generating higher employment, the government can use sport to do so. Investing in sport will generate higher employment rates than otherwise. Some comparison with the previous account, we can see that there has been a small decline. I mean, there have been increases in both GDP and employment. However, the percentage rates of GDP has dropped a little bit, and this is partly because of the Olympic Games of 2012 that could not maintain without them the same percentage. Sport employment, however, went up quite considerably from 2.11% to 2.48%. So there is a positive trend overall from 2012 to 2019, which is the last estimation. And this is the case of Lithuania in the proxy accounts. This is not official accounts, but it is our best guess of what has happened. If you complete the new satellite account, then we will know the actual figures. This is how we go, having as a guide the previous account. So we think that the direct output is about 5 billion, half a billion in terms of GVA, and the share in terms of GVA in the economy is 0.41%, but in terms of employment is much higher at 1.23% overall. If we consider direct and indirect effect, the people that are employed in sport within in Lithuania are around 31,000 people heads, share of 1.23%. The biggest sectors in the economy are the education services, sporting services, wholesale trade services from the point of view of gross value added, and retail services from the point of view of employment. So that's the first three sectors. And you can see the overall the top 10 sectors in this table. And I will leave this with you. And further, we have these previous figures broken down in terms of characteristic goods and connected goods. The characteristic goods have a smaller multiplier than the connected goods, 1.35 in the case of gross domestic product, compared to 1.43 in the case of employment. In terms of connected goods for GDP. And this is normal because in the case of connected goods, the connections with the rest of the economy from manufacturing are greater. The characteristic goods are very intensive in terms of employment. It's sport education, sport services. So there is not so much manufacturing, but there is a lot of employment and labor intensity. And that does not connect so well with the rest of the economy. So the connected goods are bound to have higher multipliers, and this is reflected in the division between characteristic goods and connected goods here for Lithuania. Finally, this is some ideas that come from the economic analysis. The first is that if we don't have any volunteering, especially in countries such as Netherlands, Austria, or the United Kingdom and Germany, then you get a very, very big increase in the cost of sport services, and especially in the cost of personnel. The most extreme example is Netherlands. If in the Dutch economy you have to pay all the volunteers, then the personnel cost will increase by 653%, which practically means that there will be no organized sport in this country. There's no way you can easily change that. So that is one way to show the importance of volunteers. Then I want to emphasize that the economic analysis shows the importance of sports infrastructure because it has a very high multiplier of 2.62. So it can be used, sport infrastructure can be used to stimulate many sectors in the economy. And then we have the use of sport investment to counter unemployment. That's another strong result. And this is because the share of sport employment is always greater than the share of sport GVA or sport GDP. So typically sport employment will be 2% in direct effects compared to 1.2% of GVA. So it can be used, investing in sport can be used to promote employment and sustainability within a country and within sport. Another idea that comes very strongly is that if you have a satellite account, then you can get an evaluation of the government surplus. The government surplus is okay, it's not exactly SROI, but it is part of the elements of SROI. It is more specific. So this is what the government invests directly, which is in SROI, and what government receives in terms of VAT, income tax, and corporation tax. All these three elements, VAT, income tax, and corporation tax, can be exactly estimated in the context of a sport satellite account. And we know how much government spends. Therefore, we know how much is the surplus, what is the exact benefit of the government financially on the point compared to the spending of investment. And always, in all countries, we have found this to be positive to a very, very big extent. And some sports, specific, you can also do that for specific sports if you do the satellite account there. Some sports which are a bit autonomous because they generate a lot of revenue can have a very, very big effect on the government budget. Recently we found that the effect of golf, or spending on golf, is 1 to 17. So one euro, say, is spent on golf, is invested on golf, and then as a result, the government receives 17 euros back. And that's a very strong argument for continuing spending, for continuing investment, because not just advocating, it's actually factually true. Even if you make a mistake, that's a big difference, a big scale. So the key messages are that rises in sports participation have the potential to transform the sport economy, both in terms of employment, GVA, but also in terms of social value and health benefits. The indirect impacts of sport become increasingly relevant and very large as the sports sector interacts a lot with the rest of the economy. And finally, sport volunteering can be seen as a major source of impact, both in terms of shadow prices and in terms of social value that it is generating. So this is for today, the presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any comments, please let me know and I can address them immediately.
Okay, Themis, thank you very much for your quick and with the best efforts, to make short explanation to the difficult items. I think at least the main comments were made, and people might have questions. And there are, of course, some categories which could be not very clear. So let me just add a few words in national languages to make some explanation. Okay. Taip, tai iš tikrųjų mano keli tokie trumpi komentarai ir tikrai nenoriu aš čia, sakykime, apibendrinti, reziumuoti, bet dar kartelį grįžti prie svarbių dalykų, tokių kaip savanorystės vaidmuo, tas subjective well-being, tai yra tas subjektyvi gerovė arba pasitenkinimas ir matavimas to pasitenkinimo yra dalis, investicijų į sportą vertinimo. Ir tai yra, kaip matom, kompleksinis dalykas. Tai nėra tai, kad mes ten vieną elementą išmatuojam ir tada galim padaryti tam tikras išvadas. Tai yra tikrai kompleksiniai dalykai. Dabar, kada mes sakome, SSA, tai yra sporto ekonominės sąskaitos, tai reiškia tai, kad mes nuo pagrindinių kaip pasakyti, pagrindinės šalies sugeneruojamos ekonominės vertės, turim galimybę su specialia metodika, kuri keitėsi pastaruoju metu, įvertinti būtent sporte sukuriamą vertę. Tai dėl ko tas yra Vilnius definition arba Vilniaus apibrėžtis, tai yra ta ekonominė sporto apibrėžtis. Dėl ko jinai, tiesiog aš primenu, nes tikrai ne vieną kartą apie tai kalbėjom, bet yra naujų žmonių prisijungusių, dėl ko tai yra būtent Vilnius definition, dėl to, kad tai buvo 2007-2008 metai, kada Vilniuje įvyko pirmasis ekonominio sporto poveikio vertinimo, ekspertų grupės posėdis ir dėl to apibrėžtis ir buvo pavadinta būtent Vilniaus vardu. Tai, tiesiog nuolatinai mes ją kartojam ir tai yra savotiška, tokia garbė ir duoklė šaliai. Dabar, kada mes iš tos ekonominės dalies, kalba buvo apie multiplikatorių, tai reiškia tą rezultatą, kuris yra išskaičiuotinas. Tai yra, jeigu taip visiškai paprastai ir kaip matėme, jisai yra, įvertinamas nuo, bendro vidaus produkto multiplikatorius ir užimtumo arba employmento multiplikatorius. Tai paprastai tariant, mes turime labai aišku skaičių, kiek investuotas vienas euras arba bet kuris kitas piniginis vienetas sukuria vertės. Tai aišku pavyzdys, kuris buvo duotas su golfu, dar reikėtų patikslinti, kurioje šalyje, tai šitie paskaičiavimai yra būtent golfo investicijos 1 euras, kuomet jisai sukuria 17 eurų vertės, tai taip. Bet matyt, pagrindinė žinutė yra ta, kad matyt, tokių panašių pristatymų ir panašių diskusijų mes stokojame savo šalyje, nepriklausomai nuo to, kad nuo 2012 metų mes turime sporto ekonominę sąskaitą ir jos buvo skaičiuojamos ir vertinamos kartu su dabartinė jau valstybės duomenų agentūra, prieš tai statistikos departamentu. Dabar mes šitos veiklos nevykdome, bet tiesiog pasikartoju dar kartą, kadangi yra prieinama prie vieningos metodikos, būtent bendradarbiaujant su Eurostatu ir, kaip žinia, turizmo sektorius, aplinkos sektorius turi jau savo metodologijas, būtent ekonominių sąskaitų skaičiavimo, tai tam tikrus elementus mes pritaikome būtent ir sporte. Ir, kol kas mes sporte Europos mastu neturime metodologijos būtent sportui ir turime tik tokias bendrasias gaires ir, aišku, tuos skaičiavimus tose šalyse, kurios buvo įvardintos pranešime, tie skaičiavimai yra atliekami kiekvienoje šalyje, naudojant ir pasitvirtinus savo metodiką nacionaliniu lygiu. Bet kokiu atveju ta pan-European, duomenų bazė ir ji yra paskutinioji padaryta 2019 metais, kadangi remiamas yra makroekonominiais rodikliais ir pagrindinėmis ekonominėmis lentelėmis. Tai yra pastarieji duomenys ir, aišku, iš tų duomenų, kuriuos generuoja Eurostatas, yra padaroma palyginimai būtent ES šalių lygmenyje. Ir, kaip žinia, šiais metais mes turime Lenkiją, kuri pirmininkauja ES tarybai. Tai Lenkijoje, būtent Varšuvoje, vyko Europos sporto forumas ir Themistocles Kokolakakis būtent buvo tas, kuris pristatė šiuos skaičius plačiai forumo dalyvių grupiai, renginyje. Tai ar turime mes kokių klausimų, pasiteiravimų, komentarų? Mes turime prieš tai dar klausimą, taip, kurį buvai atsiuntęs būtent dėl šaudimo sporto. Ar galim? There is one question which we received just before your seminar. Could we try just to put something on the table? Okay, so the question is.
Yeah, the question was, how can shooting sports be used to generate socioeconomic benefits in order to attract public or private investment?
How can shooting
sports?
Shooting, just
Specific
taking
shooting
one
sports.
concrete sport, this is a little bit
What do you
tricky.
mean by shooting? Sorry.
Shooting sport,
So the Olympic sport, yeah.
Yes,
Olympic
yes.
sport, yeah.
Um,
Is it popular in UK, shooting? Yes.
yes,
no?
it is popular.
Yeah.
It is popular. We obviously it is Olympic sport. It is
Yeah.
included. What is not included is the hunting, the blood sports are
Yeah.
not part
Yeah.
of the examination. But in this case, if you are to focus on this specific sport,
Yeah.
you have to look at the economic side first. So you have to look how much value gross domestic product is associated with practicing the sport. So you will take all the employment generated and all the wages and the profits that are associated with the sport. So that could be on the private sector, if something like that is practiced. And that will create a baseline for employment and gross domestic product for actually doing the sport. And then on this, you can see, you can add all investment that come from the public sector and the local authorities. And you can also put on this, if there is volunteering, on this, for the organization of events, a value for this volunteering, and then you have the total investment. And then you compare with the benefits that are generated from this sport. So you can see first, I cannot speak about the health benefits, but I'm pretty sure that there are in terms of the cognitive, because you need to have focusing, very strong focus for this sport. So there must be cognitive benefits, which probably can be traced in the academic literature, and that will lead to health benefits for depression or dementia. And then maybe if people are in clubs, then it's the social impact that is very important. So we say that there is a social capital and the subjective well-being, but this is not just because of practicing sport, but because of interacting with other individuals. So that can be taken into account, and you can have benefits for this specific sport that relate to health, relate to social capital, to subjective well-being. And then you have to see, probably in this case, no, but you have to see if that is translating, if you have more resources to education and criminal justice. But all these elements have to be investigated separately. If you are, you can take the general sport picture and take the participants for shooting sports. But if there are resources, you can do that individually, a bespoke analysis for the sport itself.
Yeah, excellent. Quite complex question, but providing the answer, you just repeated shortly how it might be used, all approach to concrete sport. So I think this is very, very, very good example and very good question. And okay, I'm not going to translate. I think all is recorded, and the answer was very much explanatory how it might be used. But the main point that calculations are needed. Without calculations,
it's easier to do it for sport as a whole.
Yeah.
So if you have a calculation for sport as a whole, then you will be sport per participant or sport per volunteer. You have a benefit per participant or per volunteer. And then if you know the participation rate for individual sport, you can take this value and adjust it to the participation rates of individual sports. But that won't be bespoke per sport. It will be just taking the general picture and fit it to individual sports. Which is the first way to proceed. If you want, if there is analysis, there is a need for bespoke analysis, then you have to see first in the academic literature and see if there is any specific benefit from this sport which is not shared by the others. And that will be interesting to record, and will be a shared experience across Europe if you can do that.
Jo, taigi vis tiek, žodžiu, mes taip atskirai sportui, tų skaičiavimų, atskirai konkrečiai sporto šakai tuos skaičiavimus atlikti iš tiesų sudėtinga, tačiau jeigu mes turime bendrą šalies sporto socioekonominį įvertinimą ir žinome, kiek yra tų žmonių, kurie užsiiminėja, kiek yra savanorių ir kitus parametrus, mes tada jūs galime žinant skaičius konkrečiame sporte, mes tą galime daryti skaičiavimus ir tikrai pritaikyti tai, apie ką buvo kalbėta, tam tikrus, žodžiu, kriterijus ir skaičiavimus konkrečiai sporto šakai. Tai kol kas tikrai Lietuvoje mes nesame individualizavę, sakykime, skaičiavimų šakoms ir buvo tam tikri vertinimai atlikti savo laiku ir krepšinio sporto šakoj, ir golfo sporto šakoj. Golfo ypatingai, ten dėl europinių investicijų golfas buvo pasidarę savo vertinimus, bet tas tikrai buvo daugiau negu prieš 10 metų ir pastaruoju metu mes tiesiog apie tai kažkaip ir nekalbame ir kalbėti matyt reikėtų daugiau ir ne tik kalbėti, diskutuoti, suprasti, bet ir matyt nusimatyti konkrečius veiksmus. O pabaigai matyt reikėtų reziumuojant pasakyti, kad matyt valstybei yra svarbu, jeigu mes turime investicijas, kokio dydžio jos bebūtų, ar mes kalbam apie 10 milijonų, ar apie 20 milijonų, ar apie 70 milijonų, klausimas, kokią vertę nacionalinių lygių, valstybės lygių sportas sukuria visuomenėje, kokia tai yra socioekonominė, ne tik ekonominė, bet socioekonominė nauda ir, jeigu pritaikant multiplikatorių, tai mes jau tą naudą tikrai galime, žodžiu, deklaruoti ir tada klausimas, koks yra santykis tos naudos sukuriamos sporte su kitais ekonomikos sektoriais ir tada galim turėti ir pasilyginimą ir panašiai. Tai šalies mastu, atitinkamai ir kiekvieno miesto mastu. Kiekvienas miestas turi vėlgi savo strategiją, savo politiką, savo investicijas į sporto paslaugas, į sporto organizacijas, į sporto infrastruktūrą. Tikrai autorius labai aiškiai įvardino, kad būtent multiplikatorius, būtent infrastruktūra yra 2,62. Tai tikrai tai yra tos investicijos, kurios į sportą atliekamos tikrai sugeneruoja vertės. Bet tai yra vėlgi, arba tai yra bendrieji skaičiai ir parametrai ES šalių lygmenį, arba atskiros šalies lygmenį. Deja, kol kas mes Lietuvoje šitų skaičiavimų neturime, bet žvelgiant į ateitį, manome, kad turėtumėm, dar kartelį pasikartosiu, turėti platesnę diskusiją, platesnį supratimą, gilesnį supratimą ir eiti link patvirtinimo tų tiesų, kurios šiandien dienai yra aiškios Europos ar kitų šalių kontekste. Tai ačiū labai dalyvavus šiandien. Thank you, Themis, very much. We wish you all the best for your future continuation of those important issues, both at the European level and making consultation to the different countries and sports. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.